my name's Alex Rosenberg, and welcome to Zelda 101, a brand new show where we do deep dives into pretty much everything related to The Legend of Zelda. Today, in our inaugural episode, we're going to be talking about something that you're probably going to hate me for, but screw it, we're doing it anyway. Today, we're going to talk about the CDI. Okay, now before you all start tweeting death threats at me for even daring to bring up the CDI, hold up, pump the brakes, let's talk for a second here. If you've followed Zelda Universe for the past couple years, you'll probably know that we've done a lot of CDI related content here. We've done parodies, sketches, musicals, mailbag episodes, heck, we just did a CDI themed Zelda news episode 3 days ago. This is kind of our thing. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you guys that the CDI was one of the best consoles of all time, because let's be honest, no, that's not true. With that said though, the CDI is also at the center of one of the biggest shifts within the gaming industry. And its impact is important enough that I feel like we should at very least talk about it. And so today, we're gonna do exactly that. Tonight we're gonna be talking about the CDI, what it was, and what happened. Ready? Here we go. The year is 1988. Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Die Hard are new to theaters. The average cost of a movie ticket was $3.50 a piece. Enya was relevant. And over in Japan, Nintendo begins to start thinking about producing a CD-ROM based add-on for their upcoming Super Nintendo console. For help, Nintendo decided to turn to Sony, another Japanese company whose only contribution to the industry at that point was designing the sound chip for the Super Nintendo, the Sony SPC 700. The resulting contract gave Sony the task to develop an SNES add-on known as the SNES CD, as well as create their own console. On May 31st, 1991, Sony unveiled this new console at CES in Chicago. It could run SNES CD titles and was compatible with the entirety of the Super Nintendo library. They called it the Nintendo PlayStation. It looked something like this, and it went on to pretty much change the industry. Well, maybe it would have if the last part of that sentence was actually true. Because not 24 hours after the PlayStation was revealed, Nintendo of America chairman Howard Lincoln took the stage at CES and announced to the entire world that Nintendo decided to partner with Philips. A move that the New York Times would later describe as a gigantic slap to the face for Sony. Yikes. Why would Nintendo do this? Well, according to the New York Times, it essentially came down to a dispute between Sony and Nintendo as to the terms of the agreement. Now, while information about the original contract remain unclear, reportedly this contract not only gave Sony full control over the Super Disc format, but they also gained a large amount of control over Nintendo's software licensing. And that was something Nintendo was not happy about at all. One of the ways Nintendo was able to actually rebuild the industry was to maintain strict control of the games that were actually being put on their system to make sure that the games were of actual quality. This is entirely why the Nintendo seal of quality exists. I mean, look, it's not foolproof, but like, it's still something. This contract essentially put all of that in jeopardy, and Nintendo was not okay with it. So instead, Nintendo began to secretly negotiate a better deal with Philips, a Dutch-based electronics company and Sony's then rival. This new deal was similar to the Sony contract, however this time Nintendo had control over licensing, and in return, Philips got permission to create a handful of games using 2 of Nintendo's highly rated IPs. Now, the SNES CD part of that Philips deal was eventually cancelled. However, because of that small contractual obligation, Nintendo had to give Philips the okay to create 4 games using Nintendo IPs for their own console. That console was released on December 3rd, 1991, and it was known as the Compact Disc Interactive, or as it came to be known, the CDI. And, how did that turn out?
Gee, it sure is boring around here.
My boy.
I'll grab my stuff.
Squadala, we are off.
This is illegal, you know.
That's the last time I'm going fishing.
You must die!
I hope she made lots of
Turns out, not great. This small contractual obligation eventually resulted in 4 Nintendo games. Hoto Mario, Zelda's Adventure, Link the Faces of Evil, and Zelda the Wand to Gamble On. 1 Mario game, and not 1, not 2, but 3 different Zelda games. Games that were such train wrecks that they somehow managed to be entertaining. These games were a mess for a lot of different reasons. However, the primary reason was the console itself. Between 2005 and 2006, Hardcore Gaming 101 did a series of interviews with Del Sharon, the man who actually developed two of the more infamous Zelda games, Wand of Gamelon and Faces of Evil. According to him, Philips decided to go with a CPU based on the Motorola 68000, a chip that was used in the Apple Macintosh in, get this, 1984. 7 years earlier. What? Anyway, this made the CDI dreadfully slow, and it also severely limited what the system could actually do. Dale mentions that if you look at the scrolling in either Faces of Evil or Wand of Gamelon, you'll notice that they only scroll about 2 or 2.5 screens horizontally. He mentions that this is because that while there was some actual video RAM on the system, there was so little of it that you literally could not do anything. It was just obviously not a game system, and Philips was actually very clear in telling us that they didn't believe the market for this device was games. There was a subtle hostility toward games that I noticed from the upper echelons of execs at AIM. Philips thought that people would buy the machine for home educational purposes. Bernie Luskin was one of the top execs at AIM, and his background was in college-level education systems. The other top exec at AIM, Gordon Stolberg, was from the film business, not the game business. This all changed after the launch of the CDI platform because the only titles that actually sold were the game titles. You could tell that AIM changed their action plan because Wand of Gamelon and Faces of Evil were both given about a $600,000 budget apiece. AIM was also expecting the game to have some sort of full motion video because this was the 90s and everybody thought that FMV was going to be the future of gaming. That is, until everybody woke up and realized that that was a bunch of nonsense. Listen, there are some weird FMV games from the 90s. If you don't believe me, you should check out something called Plumbers Don't Wear Ties.
Take your damn clothes off!
It's a thing! Oh yeah, and both games had to be released at the same time, which meant that Delta Sharon had essentially a year to make two completely different games. No pressure, right? In an effort to cut costs, Delta Sharon teamed up with a man by the name of Igor Rozbov, who, by the way, is so shrouded in mystery, I could not find a thing about him. Together, they created a company called Animation Magic, and they hired 6 animators with varying degrees of skill to come to the United States and work on the games for about 6 months. And of course, we all know how well that ended. The CDI games were widely criticized and mocked by pretty much everybody across the board. Even today, Nintendo refuses to acknowledge that these games even happened at all. Animation Magic went on to produce a couple more games, including I Am Mean on the PC before being eventually bought out by Vivendi and immediately dissolved in 2001. And Nintendo didn't exactly walk out of this unscathed either. They received a lot of backlash from other companies in Japan. See, in Japan, it's an unwritten rule that a company should not turn on another Japanese company in favor of a foreign one. So breaking the Sony contract was seen as a complete betrayal. However, I think the worst part about all of this is that not only did the CDI tank, but Sony, the company that Nintendo publicly humiliated on the stage of CES in 1991, rose from the ashes like a graceful phoenix and decided to produce their own console. It was a little console that was a station to play games that were on discs, and they called it PlayStation. And honestly, I would try to downplay this next second, but it's PlayStation. I think we know how well that went. Let's talk about PlayStation for a quick second. The original PlayStation was the first home console to sell over 100 million units. Its successor, a little thing called the PlayStation 2, did a little better, only being the best-selling home console of all time, with 155 million units being shipped. The PS3 ended up shipping about 88 million units, and the current console, the PS4, shifted 1 million units in the first 24 hours, being the most successful console launch to date, with titles including, but not limited to, Horizon Zero Dawn, Uncharted, Kingdom Hearts, well, kind of, God of War, Last of Us, Crash Bandicoot, Jak and Daxter, Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, The Last Guardian, Gran Turismo, Final Fantasy VII, which by the way, they took from Nintendo, Heavy Rain, Beyond Two Souls, Detroit Almost Human, and like too many more to list. There are so many good games on PlayStation, guys. So yeah, Nintendo publicly humiliated a company, then that company went right around and was like, oh, is that how we're gonna play? Okay, Queen, we got this. And then decided to casually drop a console, becoming the biggest rival and literally changing the game. And all that Nintendo has to show for it are the Philips CDI games. Yikes. All caps. Spaces in between. Exclamation point at the end. I can't even begin to imagine how different this industry would be had Nintendo and Sony actually gone through with that contract. However, while most bad games fall away into obscurity, the CDI Zelda games never really went away. Back in the early 2000s, the cutscenes from Wand of Gamelon and Faces of Evil were incredibly popular in parody videos that became known as YouTube poops. These mashup videos were incredibly popular during the early days of YouTube, and the CDI cutscenes were mostly featured in all of them. Nowadays, the parody subgenre has kind of skyrocketed in popularity, partly because of the fact that nowadays it's all like MLG, trash, and VR chat related, but make no mistake, the original videos are still out there, and they are just as weird today as they were 10 years ago. So, I don't know, maybe watch at your own risk? I don't know, I'm not you. And what's even more interesting is that even though the Sony and Nintendo deal went up in flames, the Nintendo PlayStation still kind of happened. There were about 150 or 200 prototypes that were actually made for this console, and a few of them actually turned up recently. If you're interested, Ben Heck did an incredible video series about the Nintendo PlayStation, taking it apart, seeing how it worked, and then rebuilding it and repairing it to make it look like what it actually might look like if we actually got it for real. That's up in the iCard. Check it out if you want. Anyway, that's our show. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, make sure you let us know by liking, commenting, and subscribing, and maybe hitting that bell to, join our notification squad. We're kinda cool. Somewhat, I think. We're also gonna be going around a handful of events, so if you wanna check all that stuff, make sure you follow us on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. We're gonna put all that information in the description, and it's going to be at the end card as well. And if you wanna check out the stuff that I do, or just yell at me for having a terrible voice, which honestly, retweet. You can find me on Twitch or on Instagram and Twitter at Luca_Starks. Been playing through some cool games, so maybe check that out. Anyway, you'll be checking out my friend Alan Skurnick in 2 weeks when we come back with more Zelda 101. In the meantime, I will bid you adieu. Goodbye.